Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another episode of Everything Marvel Podcast. Today, I want to discuss a little bit the new Spider Man movie. And you may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, we have a Spider Man in the MCU. It's Tom Holland. Wait a minute, we have, a different timeline going on here. What's the deal? Well, if you know anything about the comics or ever read the comics, there are a ton of different versions of Spider Man. There are a ton of different universes, hence the name Into the Spider Verse. So think of it if you watch any of the TV shows, the DC TV shows, how the Flash and Arrow, there's all these different Earths, Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 99, whatever. It's the same idea. There's infinite different universes and there's infinite different iterations of Spider-Man. So this one only covers a couple of them, so it's not as confusing as you may think. It's actually pretty good. I enjoyed it a lot. It's animated if you didn't know, and that turned some people off. I thought it was really well animated. It was done very well. I thought it would be a little cheesy and cartoonish, but it wasn't. It was great. And it's a very different style. It felt different if you're used to the normal, Iron Man, Captain America. Again, it's very different, but it's designed to be different. It's not in the same timeline. It's a different universe altogether. So, and we got a glimpse of it at the end of Venom in the post-credit scene if you stuck around. So it is a really, really good movie. I want to talk about the cast a little bit, but first I want to put out spoiler alert. We're going to go into plot details. We're going to discuss everything. So if you want to be surprised, maybe pause and come back and listen in later. Otherwise, we're going to dive into it a little bit. So the cast includes Shamik Moore. He is Miles Morales. He is this universe's new Spider-Man. So he was in Tyler Perry's House of Pain. He gets bitten by a radioactive spider right before Peter Parker in this timeline dies, which he dies in this timeline. So at one point, there's two people, in the same universe with spider powers, both bitten by radioactive spider. What are the odds? Chris Pine plays the Peter Parker in this universe, in this timeline. You may remember him from Star Trek. He was one of the main characters in Star Trek. He is killed pretty early in the movie, in the plot, by Kingpin. So as Kingpin is trying to turn on this super collider that he has built, Spider-Man's trying to stop them, and he gets killed. And this happens in the comic. Again, these are very true to the comics, so this is nothing out of the ordinary, unusual. It's pretty true to the comics. This version of Spider-Man, Chris Pine's version in this timeline, he was kind of written, and this is fact. This is not just how I felt about it, because I felt this way too, but this is fact. He is written as to be a combination of all three MCU Spider-Man. So Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland. All different aspects of those characters were rolled into this Spider-Man. Now, he doesn't get a lot of screen time, so you don't really get to see that played out, unfortunately. But it was done well. They throw little clips in there, and the funniest part is they throw the clip of him walking down the road and dancing, and they stop and they go, yeah, we really don't talk about that. Talking about Spider-Man 3, where he becomes Venom, and he starts dancing down the road, and that's one of the funniest scenes because it's kind of cheesy. But anyway, that was thrown in there. It was very funny. Jake Johnson actually plays Peter Parker, Spider-Man from the other universe. Now, this is where it gets really weird. One universe, Peter Parker dies, Miles Morales takes over. One universe, Peter Parker lives. There's no Miles Morales, or at least he's not, Spider-Man. But in this universe, Peter Parker gets separated from Mary Jane. They divorce. So this one he's an older one. He's kind of sad, depressed. He's getting kind of fat. So he's out of shape. And he ends up in this universe, in our universe that we're watching the movie in. And he kind of takes up the mantle. He's hesitant at first, but he takes up the mantle and the task of training Miles Morales to fully understand his powers, which Miles Morales' spider powers are a little different. He can turn invisible and he can shock. So it's kind of strange for people who are just used to seeing regular old MCU Spider-Man. This is different. Haley Steinfeld plays Gwen Stacy, or Spider-Woman. She's a singer, if you didn't know. She plays Spider-Woman from another universe. She was Gwen Stacy. If you remember in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Gwen Stacy died. Again, different timeline. So in this universe, she was the one bitten. She watches Peter die. So therefore, she has something to fight for, kind of thing. She ends up in this universe and kind of finds her way to Miles Morales to help him in his quest. Mahershala Ali is Aaron Davis slash Prowler. He's been in House of Cards, and he was also Cottonmouth in Luke Cage. So technically, he's been in 2 Marvel movies. He's joined the club of people who have been in multiple Marvel movies. So that's kind of cool. He's Miles' uncle, and he's kind of the one that Miles looks up to for the majority of the movie. He's the one who, he runs away and he wants to hang out with his uncle. He wants to do fun things with his uncle because his uncle, lets him do whatever and goof off. And it kind of seems like Miles' dad thinks that he's in a gang, but it's not really a gang. He's actually one of the henchmen working for Kingpin. He finds out this later in the movie, and he's crushed. It changes him a little, and he actually, Prowler dies in the movie, and this really scars Miles, you can tell. Brian Tyree Henry, he is Jefferson Davis, Miles' dad. He's a cop who seems like he's seen a lot in his career, and he really hates Spider-Man because he's a vigilante, because he can basically do what he wants and handle justice how he wants and get away with it. And so that kind of frustrates him that he doesn't have control over him. He views Spider-Man in the beginning as a menace, but he comes around and he starts to understand that he does things the way he does for a reason. And he ends up liking Spider-Man by the end of the movie, which by the end of the movie is his son. He doesn't know. He can't tell his dad that he's Spider-Man. Lily Tomlin plays May Parker slash Aunt May. She's a comedian, and she's been around for a while. You may not know the name, but she has been around. She's a very popular comedian. She is actually, Aunt May is still alive in the other universe where the other Peter came from. So when he sees Aunt May in this universe, it brings back so many memories to him. It's really hard for him. Here, she shows them in this universe how to get into the deceased Peter Parker's hideout. He has this really awesome hideout in this universe that's like, I want to compare it to like the Batcave. They go down this elevator, and there's all these suits and all this technology and everything, and it's really cool. So she takes them there to help them take down Kingpin. Luna Lauren Velez plays Rio Morales, Miles' mother. She's been in Fox New York Undercover, and she's a very supporting, loving mother to Miles. I believe she's a nurse, if I remember correctly. And she's kind of always supporting Miles more when the dad seems like he's being too harsh on Miles. Zoe Kravitz plays Mary Jane Watson, Peter's wife, in both universes. Now, in this timeline, this universe, Peter Parker has died, so she's kind of grieving. She tells everybody that Peter was Spider-Man, and they have this big mourning and everything. Where in the other timeline, where the other Peter has come from, they're just separated. So he comes to this universe, and he tries to pour out his heart and his soul to this Mary Jane, and he doesn't understand why she's not. It takes him a second, and then he realizes, oh wait, this is not my Mary Jane, and it's kind of interesting to watch. John Mulaney plays Peter Porker. He's a comedian and writer for Saturday Night Live. He's a very strange version in this movie of Spider-Man from another universe, and they actually call him Spider-Ham. It was a parody back in '83 of Spider-Man, Peter Porker, and it's a funny thing. His animation style is different. He fights different. He has a giant hammer, and he just smashes people kind of in a cartoon fashion. And side note here, one of the interesting things I thought I liked, and it's just different about this movie, is every iteration of Spider-Man feels like it's drawn differently, animated differently. There's an anime version drawn in anime. Peter Porker's kind of done in like a Looney Tunes style, and Spider-Man Noir, which we'll get to in a second, is done in a black and white, and it's just really, it kind of contrasts them right there together, and it's really cool to watch and to see. Kimiko Glenn plays Penny Parker, which is the anime version I was just talking about. She was actually in Orange is the New Black. She's from another universe where a Japanese American middle school student was adopted by Aunt May and Uncle Ben following the death of her parents. She pilots a mechanical suit known as SPDR, which is partially controlled by a radioactive spider that shares a psychic link with the pilot. So they kind of work in sync. Think of it as like a Pacific Rim thing. Their minds link up, and they work together. So when she thinks punch, the machine punches, and she has the same power as the spider in the suit. So that's a very strange one to watch if you're not used to this kind of different Spider-Man. Nicolas Cage was actually in this movie. As I'm sitting there watching it, My buddy elbows me and he goes, "Hey, it's Nick Cage." And I was like, "No, it's not." The more I listened, I was like, "Wait a minute." So I have to Google it in the movie theater. Sure enough, Nick Cage plays Peter Parker from a different universe. It's the 1930s version. He's called Spider-Man Noir. He's black and white. It's very, I don't call it newspaper style, but it's all in black and white. He kind of fights like a gritty 1930s cop, and he uses guns and stuff. But I couldn't. It blew my mind that Nick Cage was in Spider-Man. What he was Spider-Man, in that universe. What movie has Nick Cage not been in at this point? I mean, really. Catherine Hahn plays Olivia Octavius, Doc Ock in this universe. You may be thinking, wait a minute, Dr. Octopus is a guy in our universe. Well, no, 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 no. He's a guy in the original trilogy. In this universe, it's this woman. She was in Crossing Jordan. She's an evil scientist that is the head of Alchemax, working for Wilson Fisk. Alchemax is kind of the conglomerate, the evil corporation that Wilson Fisk owns and works for. Liv Schreiber is Wilson Fisk / Kingpin. You have to know him if you're a Marvel fan. He is in X-Men. He's Sabretooth, Wolverine's brother. He is a crime lord, benefactor of Alchemax, and the creator of the Super Collider, which is the machine that he is trying to bring his family back with. So the whole reason he has built this machine, and I'll get into a little bit more in a minute, he's trying to bring his family back. And he accidentally opens the multiverse to the other Spider-Man. So the main plot of the story, here's where we're going to lose some of the, spoilers. I haven't really gotten into a whole lot of spoilers. There've been a few, but we're going to go into the main plot. So he gets bitten by a radioactive spider while hanging out with his uncle. He enjoys graffiti, and they're in the sewer practicing graffiti, and the spider just happens to be there, lands on him and follows him around and lands on him and eventually bites him. And I think he ends up going back to this place to try and find the spider later after he realizes something's different. He's trying to go to school, and he ends up grabbing things unintentionally, and he can't pull his arm off because, his spider hands are sticky. So he tries to go back, and he's trying to convince himself this was just a regular spider. I'm not Spider-Man. And he goes back and he finds a spider. He realizes, wait, this is not an ordinary spider. Somehow he ends up crashing through the wall. He ends up in the middle of this battle between Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and Kingpin. Kingpin has built this super collider and is trying to turn it on. He's trying to locate his family who left him, and he's trying to bring them back. They left him and actually got killed in his universe, but he's trying to find them in another universe and bring them here. So he's trying to get into the multiverse, and he does, but he unintentionally brings another Spider-Man. So once Spider-Man gets killed, well, he actually gets injured. Miles Morales walks up to him and he says, hey, listen, you've got to turn this thing off. He gives him a USB drive. He says, you've got to turn this thing off. You're the only hope. You have the power now. And so he basically puts the fate of New York, the world, whatever, in Miles Morales' hands, and it kind of overwhelms him. And so he wants to learn to be Spider-Man, but he has no one to teach him once he sees Kingpin go over and just smash Peter Parker. So one of the Spider-Men, like I said earlier, that ended up in this universe was Peter Parker, but from a different universe. And they meet up, and he ends up trying to teach Miles Morales how to harness his powers, and so they can go and take down Kingpin and turn off the Super Collider to make sure that it can never get used again to mess with the multiverse. Because, again, if you ever watched Flash or Arrow or any of that, when you mess with the multiverse in the timeline, it just chaos ensues. So they were trying to turn that off. They end up meeting the other Spider-Man iterations, and they team up eventually. It takes some time, some collaboration, and they team up and take down Kingpin, turn off the Super Collider, and they all actually get back to their respective timelines. It seemed for a minute that someone was going to stay behind, but they didn't. So I thought it was a great movie. I thought it was a great storyline. It was slightly confusing if you're not used to the idea of different universes. It'll just blow your mind if all you know about Spider-Man is Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland, because they've technically all been in the same universe, so to speak. The comedy was well placed. There were some very funny lines, very funny things done and said, and I didn't think anything was too over the top. Peter Parker was probably the strangest part in the anime chick. But other than that, I thought, having different Spider-Man brought a lot into the story. Again, the animation was different. It took some time to get used to, but by the end, you weren't even thinking, hey, I'm watching a cartoon. I'm watching something that's animated. You were just into the story. You were fully engulfed in the story. And I loved that they poked fun at the other Spider-Man in the past. I thought that was hilarious. They kind of left it open for a sequel. If you watch very closely at the end, when he's kind of laying in bed, you see the multiverse open back up, and someone says something to him, and I'm pretty sure it's Gwen Stacy. She's talking to him. So the question becomes, how did she open the multiverse? How did it get opened back up? Because they turned off the super collider and destroyed it, so that's done. How does she figure out how to get back into his universe? There was very little bad about this movie, but the only negative in my mind was that there was a ton of villains. I lost count at one point of all the villains that were in this movie. I mean, you had Kingpin, you had Doc Ock, you had Prowler, you had multiple henchmen from each one. So it got confusing. And that's kind of why they needed all these Spider-Men to come together, is to take out all these villains, because they had so many. And the one thing I thought was odd about the movie was Kingpin was oddly large. If you watch him get out of a car or go into a building, like, his body was way unproportional to the rest of the characters, to his head, to everything in the movie. He was just giant. And I know Kingpin is supposed to be this huge character, this massively strong character, but it just looked awkward, to be honest with you. It was like, wow, you just saw his head in this giant suit, this black suit, and just his head was there. But it helped when he smashes Peter Parker, it kind of brought a little bit more weight to that, because he's huge. So in conclusion, it was a great movie. Definitely think you could go see it and enjoy it. Again, if you're not 100% clear on the multiverses, maybe this has cleared it up for you a little bit. So some upcoming episodes I want to talk about. We still have yet to dive into the Avengers Endgame theories, because they more pour in every day. I have probably 10 different ones saved on my phone that I'm going to do a whole episode about and go over with you each one, and why I think it's good, why I think it's bad. Captain Marvel is coming up in March. We may do one more episode on her, and then we'll go from there. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys. We will see you next time.